My name is Ruth Calloway. I am 53 years old, and I had been the medical records coordinator on the third-floor administrative wing of Whitfield Regional Medical Center for 2 years and 4 months, when everything I had spent 11 years doing finally arrived, unrequested, in a place I had thought was safe from it. Whitfield Regional was a mid-sized regional medical center in central Virginia, not academic, not rural, the specific institutional middle ground of a hospital that served a county with 2 major employers, a regional VA annex, and enough proximity to the capital that it handled, occasionally, cases that arrived with federal flags on the intake paperwork. Nobody on the administrative floor thought much about the federal flags. They were processed the same as everything else. My job was to make sure they were processed correctly. The administrative wing smelled like toner and the specific flat paper smell of a records department that moved 1,200 documents a day through a system that was digitizing slowly and incompletely, leaving a purgatorial, half-physical, half-electronic archive that required someone to know both the old system and the new one simultaneously. The overhead lights were full fluorescent. No dimming concession to the time of day, just the relentless institutional glow of a workspace that had never been designed for human comfort. Chairs with foam compressed to nothing. A carpet the color of a decision nobody remembers making. I had chosen this specifically. I had been a Defense Intelligence Agency analyst for 6 years and a field-attached intelligence officer with Joint Special Operations Command for 5 years after that. And when I separated from federal service following the injury to my left knee that made the field component of my position untenable, I had specifically looked for a role that was administrative, medical adjacent, and in a physical space where nothing significant was expected to happen. A records coordinator at a regional hospital was not the most exciting available option. It was the correct one. I processed charts. I managed the digitization backlog. I filed the federal flags in the correct designated folders, which I had reorganized in my first week because the previous system had no coherent access logic and would have been impossible to use under time pressure. Nobody noticed the reorganization. That was fine. I hadn't done it to be noticed. To the administrative staff, the third floor was a support function. Necessary, invisible, the unglamorous machinery that made the clinical floor's work documentable and therefore real. To me, it was a room full of information. And I had spent 17 years in rooms full of information and knew what to do with them. I moved through my days with the specific patience of someone trained to wait. I noted the staff dynamics, who deferred to whom, where the information actually moved versus where the org chart said it moved, which attending's orders arrived with the specific fingerprints of someone who had received a phone call first. I reorganized 3 additional filing systems in my first year, each time without announcement. Each time in ways that made the clinical team slightly faster and slightly more accurate, and that none of them attributed to anything. Because records coordination is the kind of work that, when done correctly, produces no visible evidence of being done. The dog tags were at home. My clearance was technically inactive, pending review, the way it stays when you leave federal service, but leave the door open behind you. I had not decided whether I was going to walk back through it. I had been not deciding for 2 years. The paperwork in front of me most days was ordinary. Some of it wasn't. I processed the ordinary and the not ordinary the same way. Accurately, completely, correctly. And I said nothing about the not ordinary to anyone, because saying things about not ordinary documents to people without clearance to hear them is a habit I had trained out of myself over 17 years and had not trained back in. Elliot Branson had been the CEO of Whitfield Regional for 6 years and had the specific confidence of a man who had spent those 6 years in a building where his name was on the letterhead and had updated his sense of the world accordingly. He was not a physician. He was a healthcare administrator, an MBA and a health management credential. which was a legitimate professional path that produced genuinely skilled hospital executives. And Branson was genuinely skilled at the things a hospital CEO needs to be skilled at: finance, regulatory compliance, community stakeholder management, the particular art of keeping a mid-sized regional facility solvent in an insurance landscape designed to make that difficult. He was good at his job. I want to say this first and mean it. He was also a man who had developed over 6 years of being the most authoritative person in most of the rooms he occupied, a comfortable and thorough belief in his own ability to assess what he was looking at. He assessed me as administrative support staff. He was not wrong about the category. He was completely wrong about what was inside it. He came to the 3rd floor on a Tuesday in February for a records audit, a routine compliance review, the kind that happened twice a year and generated a 2-day disruption to the department's workflow. I had prepared the documentation packets in advance, indexed by review category, with a cross-reference sheet that reduced the audit's estimated completion time by approximately 4 hours. Branson's compliance officer noticed the cross-reference sheet and mentioned it to him. He looked at it. He looked at the filing system. He looked at me. "Who reorganized these systems?" he said. "I did," I said. The previous structure had no consistent access logic. The new index? The previous structure had been approved by administration, he said. "Yes," I said. "It was also non-functional under any time-sensitive condition. I documented the changes in the department log. The rationale is, records coordination staff doesn't redesign systems without administrative sign-off." He set down the cross-reference sheet in a specific way, not aggressively, but with the finality of a man returning something to a category below him. "This is a compliance risk. It reduces error rate," I said, "by approximately 30% based on the quarterly audit data from Ruth." The specific usage of a first name by someone who has decided you are below last name formality. You process charts, you file documents. This is important work. The pause that turns a compliment into a diminishment. Let's keep it in its lane. The compliance officer was watching with the expression of someone whose efficiency had just been classified as a liability. "Of course," I said. My right hand had gone flat on the desk. I noted it and released it, finger by finger. I had been in rooms in 3 countries where the wrong response to an authority figure had significantly higher stakes than this one, and I had been quiet in all of them, and I was quiet now. Branson left. The compliance officer gave me a look that was not unsympathetic and that she could not afford to make more specific. I went back to my charts. In the corner of the 3rd floor, near the records annex that nobody used except me, a VA patient had been admitted 2 days prior to the attached outpatient clinic down the hall. A retired Army Staff Sergeant named Harold Pruitt, 67, being treated for a service-connected respiratory condition that the VA had been managing for 6 years with the specific bureaucratic patience of a system that moves slowly and means well. He had been coming to the 3rd floor waiting room while his appointment ran long because the chairs were better than the ones in the clinic. He sat with the specific stillness of a man who has spent a career waiting in places more difficult than this, and he watched the administrative floor with the quiet attention of a man who keeps his own account. He had watched the Branson exchange from the waiting room chairs. When Branson's group left, Pruitt caught my eye. He said nothing. He just nodded once, the specific acknowledgement of a person who has occupied the position of being comprehensively underestimated by a man with authority and who has survived it, and who recognizes a fellow survivor. I returned the nod. I went back to my charts. In approximately 48 hours, 2 things were going to arrive on this floor simultaneously: a patient without a name and the people who knew his name and had the specific kind of authority that makes hospital CEOs step back without being asked. I did not know this yet, but I was in a room full of information. And information assembles itself whether or not you are watching it. And somewhere in the federal flag folders I had reorganized in my first week. Pieces of something were beginning to align. The John Doe came in on Wednesday evening. Male, late 40s, found unresponsive on the shoulder of Route 17 outside Culpeper. No identification, no phone, no wallet. Consistent with a medical event rather than a trauma event, GCS 6 on scene. He was admitted to the ICU. The intake team ran the standard unidentified protocol. Fingerprints into the federal database, photograph to the county sheriff, the specific careful bureaucracy of a hospital receiving a person without a name. The fingerprint result came back flagged. Not identified. Flagged. Which is a different thing. A flagged result means the record exists in a database that the requesting system does not have clearance to access, which means the person's identity is known to someone who is not going to share it through the standard channel, which means a call goes to a federal liaison number that most hospital compliance officers have never had to use and are not prepared for when they do. The call went to compliance. Compliance called Branson. Branson came to the records floor. He came to me specifically because the Federal Liaison Coordination for Whitfield Regional ran through the Medical Records Office, and the Medical Records Coordinator was the person whose desk held the relevant intake protocol. He set the flagged result notice on my desk. "What does this mean?" he said. I looked at it. I had seen flagged results before. I had been one of the people who set flags. I understood precisely what this meant, and precisely what came next, and precisely how much of that I was authorized to explain to the CEO of a regional hospital. "It means his identity is protected under federal classification," I said. "The standard response is to maintain clinical care without identification and await federal contact. They will come to you, not the other way around." "How long?" "Depends on who flagged it and when they're notified. Could be hours, could be less." Branson looked at the notice. He looked at me. "You've seen one of these before," he said. "Once or twice," I said. He looked at me the way he had looked at the cross-reference sheet. The recalibration of a man who has just found an unexpected variable in a system he believed he understood completely. Then the recalibration completed, and he filed me back under records coordination. "Keep this quiet," he said. "Normal care protocol, no staff speculation." "Of course," I said. He left. I looked at the flag notice for a moment. The flag code in the upper right corner was a 6-character alphanumeric sequence. Most people, including most federal liaison officers at regional hospitals, would not know what that sequence indicated. It indicated a level of protected identity that was not law enforcement, not witness protection, not standard federal employment. I knew what it indicated. I put the notice in the correct folder, the one I had reorganized in my first week, the one with the access logic that Branson had classified as a compliance risk. And I went back to my other charts. My hands were very still. They were always very still when I was doing something that mattered. The ICU attending came to records at 9 p.m. Dr. Lena Marsh, mid-30s, the specific focused competence of a physician who had chosen intensive care because she wanted the hardest cases and had spent a decade proving she could handle them. She had a look I recognized. The look of a clinician working a patient with insufficient information and the awareness that the insufficient information was not an accident. She set a copy of the metabolic panel on my desk. "He has drug interactions that I can't reconcile without his medication history," she said. "If he's on anticoagulants, the treatment I want to run is contraindicated. If he's not, the delay is causing damage." A pause. I need to know who he is. I know, I said. Can you? I can't access his record, I said. I don't have the clearance for this specific flag. This was true. My clearance was inactive, pending review. The federal contact will come tomorrow. They'll bring what you need. She looked at the metabolic panel. She looked at me. He might not have until tomorrow, she said. I looked at the panel. She was right. The interaction risk was real. The window was specific, and waiting for morning contact was not a clinically neutral choice. I thought for a moment. Tell me his current presentation in detail, I said. Everything. I'll tell you what I can. She sat down. I could not tell her who he was. I could, based on the flag code and the metabolic presentation and 17 years of working in rooms where this specific category of person existed, narrow the relevant medication class to something she could verify against the interaction risk without needing the name. Not diagnosis, not history. Just the specific guidance that said, assume this class is present and the interaction risk resolves. It was not a clearance violation, it was the minimum useful information. She looked at me after I said it. How do you know that? She said. I process a lot of federal documents, I said. She held my eyes for a moment. Then she went back to the ICU. The corridor was quiet. The overnight records staff had gone to the break room. Harold Pruitt had gone home hours ago. It was 11 p.m., and the third-floor administrative wing had the specific stillness of an institutional space in the middle of its night. The fluorescence no less bright, the carpet no less aggressively neutral, the toner smell no less flat. I sat at my desk and thought about nothing specific. In 2011, outside Kabul, I had been in a room with 3 analysts and a special operations team running an extraction sequence for an asset whose identity I knew and whose location I had helped establish and whose successful extraction I had spent 9 months of my life working toward. The asset had made it. The sequence had worked. I had not been in the room when it resolved. I had been in a vehicle 4 kilometers away, doing the part of the work that required someone to be 4 kilometers away. And I had learned the outcome through a 3-word message on a secure line. 3 words. The specific efficiency of communication between people who know that words cost something and spend them accordingly. I had thought about those 3 words for 12 years, not with regret, with the specific satisfaction of work that was completed correctly in conditions that made completion difficult. I went back to my charts. They came at 9:17 a.m. I heard them before I saw them. Not rotary wing, not tactical vehicles. The specific sound of a town car stopping with authority in a space that was not a parking space. And the quality of footsteps in a hospital corridor that are not hurrying and are not browsing and are not visiting. The footsteps of people who have somewhere specific to be and have already arrived. 2 of them. Suits. The specific quality of suits worn by people who wear suits as a professional uniform rather than a social statement. No pocket squares, no luxury branding, the muted colors of people who have learned not to be visible. The woman in front carried a credentials wallet that she opened at the security desk without being asked. I watched through the records room glass. The security officer looked at the credentials. He picked up the desk phone. He made a call. He waited. He listened. He set the phone down. He looked at the credentials again, and then he looked at the corridor in the way a person looks at a space they have just been told to clear. I'm going to need everyone on this floor except essential medical staff to step out, he said. Not to anyone specific. To the corridor. This is a federal security matter. The compliance officer looked up. 2 administrative assistants looked up. A physician's scheduler gathered her things with the practiced speed of someone who has learned not to ask questions when federal credentials are involved. Branson came out of his office at the corridor end. "Excuse me," he said. The authority in his voice was genuine and completely ineffective. "This is my facility. You cannot clear my administrative floor without—" The woman with the credentials turned to him. She did not raise her voice. "Sir," she said, "I need you to step out." Branson had spent 6 years being the most authoritative person in most rooms. He had never been in a room with this particular species of authority. The authority that does not need a building's name on the letterhead to own whatever space it enters. He opened his mouth. "Sir," she said again. The same volume. The word the second time was different from the word the first time in the way that a door being closed is different from a door being locked. Branson stepped out. I watched him go. I looked at my desk. I knew what they were here for. I had known since the flag code, since the metabolic panel, since I had told Marsh what class of medication to assume. I had been in rooms with this kind of information for 17 years, and the information always resolved the same way. Correctly, or not at all. The woman with the credentials turned to the security officer. She said, "We're looking for the medical records coordinator." She was 36, I estimated. The economy of her movement said field experience as well as administrative. Her partner, male, late 40s, the particular density of someone who had spent a long career moving heavy things from one side of a crisis to the other, stood at the door while she walked to my desk. She looked at me. She looked at the federal flag folder on my desk, the one I had reorganized, the one with the access logic nobody had found useful until now. And then she looked at my left hand, at the specific pattern of scar tissue across 3 of my knuckles that was not the result of any accident I had ever been willing to describe in a workplace setting. She sat down. She said, "Your clearance review was completed 3 weeks ago. It was reinstated at the original level." A pause. "Nobody told you." I looked at the folder. "Nobody told me," I said. "That's why it took us until this morning. We had to go through the inactive file protocol." She set a document on the desk. Not a badge, not a credentials wallet. A sheet of paper with a header I had not seen on printed paper in 2 years and 4 months. "We have a patient in your ICU whose treatment protocol requires someone with current SCI access to authorize the medication history release. Your facility's federal liaison list was outdated." She held my eyes. "You were current. The list wasn't." I looked at the header on the document. I had processed 1,200 documents in the 2 years and 4 months I had been in this building. I had filed federal flags and reorganized access indexes and processed the administrative machinery of a regional hospital in Central Virginia with the specific thoroughness of someone who understands that the machinery matters even when nobody is watching it matter. And I had been current the entire time. The clearance I had been not deciding whether to reinstate had reinstated itself through the periodic review processes I had forgotten to monitor, and it had been sitting in a file for 3 weeks unreported. And now a CIA officer was sitting across from me with a document that said I was the only person in this building authorized to do the thing that the man in the ICU needed done. "He's going to be all right," I said. It wasn't a question. "If you authorize the release," she said, "Dr. Marsh has been waiting since 6 a.m. I looked at the document. I picked up the pen. "I will not tell you the patient's name. I am not authorized to tell you the patient's name. And I would not tell you even if I were, because the years I spent in rooms where information cost something had given me a thorough and permanent understanding of why certain things belong to the people they belong to, and not to anyone else. I will tell you that when I brought the medication authorization to the ICU at 9:47 a.m., Dr. Marsh looked at it and then looked at me with the expression I had seen on Lena Marsh's face the night before. the expression of a physician who has just received information she urgently needed from a source she had not correctly assessed. "Medical records," she said. "Medical records," I confirmed. She almost smiled. She went to work. Branson found me at 10:15 in the corridor outside the records room. The CIA officers had gone to the ICU. The administrative floor had been uncleared, the displaced staff filtering back to their desks with the slightly dazed quality of people who have had their Tuesday reclassified. The compliance officer passed me without making eye contact, which I understood. She had a great deal of processing to do, and I was part of what she was processing. Branson stood in front of me. He was not the man who had set down the cross-reference sheet. He was a more careful version of that man. A man who had just been instructed to leave his own administrative floor by a federal officer and had stood in the hallway for 40 minutes while things happened inside that he was not cleared to know about. He looked at the records room. He looked at the federal flag folder visible through the glass, the one I had reorganized, the one with the access logic that had let me find the right document in 40 seconds this morning. He looked at me. He did not ask. I thought about whether I was going to offer it. "I spent 11 years doing federal work in intelligence," I said. "When I left, I came here. I like this job." I held his eyes. "I do it well." He was quiet for a moment. "The compliance risk flag," he said, "on the reorganized filing system. I'd like to retract it." "I know," I said. He nodded. He went back to his office. I went back to mine. Pruitt was in the waiting room chairs at 2 p.m. when I came back from the ICU update. He had his appointment paperwork in his hands, the quarterly respiratory review, the 6-year ongoing management of a condition that had followed him home from a deployment he had not chosen and would not have missed. And he looked up when I came through. He looked at the CIA credentials folder visible under my arm. They had given me a copy of the authorization document for the records file, which I was processing in the standard manner, because that was my job and I did my job. He said nothing for a moment. Then, "Federal?" "Yes," I said. He nodded slowly, the nod of a man who has spent a career in proximity to federal things and has learned to recognize their shape. "You going back?" he said. I thought about the clearance sitting reinstated in the file for 3 weeks. I thought about the flag code I had read in 40 seconds because I had reorganized the folder in my first week. I thought about the 3 words on a secure line in 2011 and the specific satisfaction of work completed correctly. "I'm going to finish my charts first," I said. He almost smiled. "That's an answer," he said. "That's the only one I have right now," I said. I went into the records room. I sat down. I opened the chart backlog, 42 documents, the standard afternoon accumulation, and began processing them in the order I always process them. Federal flags first, then status changes, then new admits, then discharge summaries. The federal flag folder sat on the corner of my desk. I was a medical records coordinator at a regional hospital in Central Virginia. I processed 1,200 documents a week. I reorganized filing systems that nobody noticed until they needed them. I was, on the available evidence, just paperwork. The paperwork knew exactly what it was. I went back to work. If Ruth's story made you sit forward, if something in it felt like a truth about the person in the room that nobody thinks to look at twice, hit that like button and share it today. We tell the stories of the ones nobody asked about, because those are always the ones carrying the most. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss one. And drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this one reaches. Script word count. 4,180 words. Built to framework spec. All 14 beats, all 6 motifs. All 5 retention loops, key differentiators. DIA analyst, CIA arrival, No uniforms, no formation, no helicopters. Administrative floor not clinical, medical records coordinator, clearance as the reveal, not a call sign. CEO, villain, floor physically cleared, patient identity classified, Pruitt as silent long game witness. Final image. Back to the charts. The paperwork knows what it is.